Thanks. We are on. We are recording. We're going to go onto Facebook in a second. Oh, wrong place. Hope everybody's doing good during the 10 days of repentance, 10 days of Aseret Yemei Tshuva, during this time of being focused on especially focused on our actions right now, right? And so hopefully we're going to see some good stuff happen this year. We're hoping that everybody stays healthy and hopefully we have everybody.
I should have done this on the other thing.
We're putting up on Facebook right now, folks. Just give me a second. Hopefully, again, get a good start. And
yes, I forgot it. That was.
And we're going to read about Joseph today.
Thank you, Dad. I think if I had it, with that with Dad being at work,
Kind of go.
probably,
Good morning.
if he was taking a nap,
There's a little yawn.
upstairs, 'cause I tend to be upstairs.
So
Dad's here. Put him upstairs.
we're going to get going in a sec, but we have a chance to read Joseph today, about Joseph, and it's actually a perfect portion to read, I think, this time of year. Maybe even the best portion to read for this time of forgiveness. And I'm not sure how much of it we're going to get to. I don't know how in depth we're going to get into this part, but you will see some things, I think, that are kind of very relevant for this time of year. Again, I don't know how much we'll get to, and I apologize if we don't get to some of the most relevant parts about forgiveness, but I promise you we'll get to some, and next week it'll still be relevant. It might be a little less on our minds, but it doesn't stop being on our minds. During this month of Tishrei, and again during times of holidays, I will say that we skipped over some sections in the Ginsburg translation, or the Ginsburg collection of Midrash. He has a whole bunch of stuff about Joseph and the brothers fighting against Esau and his family, which we read a little bit last week. But it's really strange, and it's from a Ginsburg took it from a book, not really apocrypha, but Midrash. It's called Yosefan, which was, according to kind of like Jewish tradition, a version of Josephus, but it's got some weird stuff in it, and it really doesn't have anything to do with Joseph and the Jacob story. It's not called Josephan because of Joseph. It's called Josephan because of Josephus. But again, this is an interesting, maybe we can't really make sense of what Josephan what was intended. More, again, like a Jewish version of, well, Josephus was Jewish, but not read by Jews. So this was kind of like a Jewish collection of important stories, maybe. But there's parts about Joseph that Ginsburg included were not really, had really nothing to do with Joseph. It has to do with these wars that were fought between Egyptian and Greco-Roman kings, which maybe was based on some kind of version of Jewish history of that time, but it's hard to figure out really what they're doing there. But we're going to look back at the actual text and specifically the Genesis story and the Midrash on that, which is pretty important, pretty rich, and pretty relevant, as I said, to this time of year. So let me just give me 1 second, making sure that we're streaming, because yep, we are. And I do want to bring up one very, very quickly. I want to bring up very quickly the Torah, just so you can see this part, which is from the very end of the book of Genesis. And let me share this right now. Again, I want to wish everybody good morning. We still have some people popping in, and this is our first Midrash class of the new year. I'm glad, everybody's here. I know some people are not on yet. We're going to get going in a sec, but I'm glad to see everybody here who is beginning the new year right with a little text study. And let me just get this up here sharing. Let me just get up the Torah for a quick sec. And okay. And this is, apologize for the crazy amounts of shadow on me, weird lighting. Hold it one second. Give me 1 second. All right, a little bit better. Okay, so looking at the Torah, after Jacob dies, it says that Joseph flung himself on his father's face. And again, we read about the embalming, the fact that he was mourned in Egypt for 40 days before he goes to Israel. And they go there. And it says that after burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who had gone up to bury his father, which is interesting because, of course, it's not just his father, it's their father. But the focus is definitely on, the verb is definitely on Joseph, Vayashav Yosef. And then we have this very famous, I would say very famous story. Maybe it's not that famous. It should be famous. But it is a really powerful story. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did him?" So they sent this message to Joseph: before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, "Forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father." And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him, and said, "We are prepared to be your slaves." So this is after Jacob dies. Now, again, the Midrash we're going to see today is about this exact section and about what happens when we are forgiven and yet still maybe not so sure that we are really forgiven. So let us take a look at this. Rosemary, would you like to start reading for us this morning? Yeah, we're going to give it we're starting at 9:10. So let's get going. Rosemary, you're on mute, so let me unmute you.
Just, okay.
Go ahead. Thanks. Right. So we're starting with Joseph's magnanimity. Love that.
Joseph's magnanimity.
Uh-huh.
As Joseph was returning from the burial of his father in the cave of Machpelah, he passed the pit into which his brethren had once cast him, and he looked into it and said, "Blessed be God who permitted a miracle to come to pass for me here." The
Oh,
brother,
wait, hold on a second. So let's just explain this. So again, from what we know, Joseph has not been back to the land of Canaan since his being sold into slavery. So he's there. He's there for the first time to bury his dad. And as he walks past the exact spot where he was put into the ground by his brothers, he says a blessing. Thank you, God, for a miracle that came to pass for me here. Nes, like Nes Gadol, a big miracle happened for me here. Well, it teaches us, number one, that when we come to a place where something miraculous happened for us, that we can say a blessing there. And for anyone who has had a near miss or a near, fatal experience in a place, there is a strange feeling that comes over you when you're in that place. So it's interesting that we have a tradition of saying a blessing in such a place. And I have a place like that. I have a place in the Grapevine where I almost died in a car accident. I mean, luckily I walked away completely unscathed, but it was a type of accident that I could have just as easily with 1 second, half a second, been dead completely. No going to the hospital. Do not pass go. And so every time I pass by that place, I say something, I say a blessing. And going past a place today, going past a place for us today, oftentimes it would be kind of maybe a car situation where we, where we were spared miraculously from death. And by the way, the same thing goes on the other hand, if we know somebody has died, or if we were not, or somebody was not given a miracle in that place, it's very hard to pass by that place. And some people unfortunately have to pass by that place, every day. I mean, there's a place on the 405 freeway that, now has a horrible feeling for my daughter. And people who, have lost people in accidents and who've had tragedy happen in certain places. It's very hard to go past a place without recognizing it and saying something, and kind of, again, people put up, we see the shrines that people build in these kinds of places, but whether or not there's a shrine there, it's hard to pass by that place without recognizing it. So here we have a midrash that there was this place that Joseph passes by for the first time since he was taken down to Egypt, and he sees the place and he says a blessing. Well, that move, that action is what causes, according to the Midrash, the brothers to react as they do. So again, we already looked at the Torah. I showed you the Torah where it says the brothers didn't think Joseph had forgiven him. Why? The Midrash says because they see this happen when they're in Canaan. So let's read what they do.
the brothers inferred from these words of gratitude, which Joseph but uttered in compliance with the injunctions of the law, that he cherished the recollection of the evil they had done him, and they feared, now that their father was dead, their brother would requite them in accordance with their deeds. They observed, moreover, that since their father was no more, Joseph had given up the habit of entertaining them at his table, and they interpreted this as a sign of his hatred of them. In reality, it was due to Joseph's respect and esteem for his brothers. So long as my father was alive, Joseph said to himself, he bade me sit at the head of the table, though Judah is king and Reuben is the firstborn. It was my father's wish, and I complied with it. But now it is not seemly that I should have the first seat in their presence. And yet, being ruler of Egypt, I cannot yield my place to any other. He thought it best, therefore, not to have the company of his brothers at his meals.
Yep. So a couple things that go on in this midrash, by way of explanations, right? By way of kind of telling us why this happens. The first is, okay, the Torah tells us that after Jacob died, the brothers start to panic. So that's what causes it, right? okay, so the Midrash goes a little further and tells us that Joseph actually, the brothers see Joseph recognizing that place and kind of feeling even more guilty with this. Again, all this gets to this very human reaction that the Torah does tell us, and the Midrash amplifies, that just because we've been forgiven doesn't mean we feel we've been forgiven, which is, as I said at the outset, this is a great message for this time of year, because in a time when we're asking for forgiveness and being asked for forgiveness, there is this question of whether we are really truly forgiving people, or whether we believe we've been forgiven, and whether it's capable, whether we believe the person's capable of forgiving us. So this is a very human reaction to forgiveness, and you see it played out. We see it played out every day, in our lives. So again, Joseph does not. Joseph hasn't done anything to make them think that, but they think it, and again, maybe it's because a lot of times we think if somebody forgives us, we don't understand how they could have forgiven us, because in the back of our minds, we wonder whether we would have forgiven somebody for doing the same thing. If we had this, if they had the same thing, we did to them, if they did it to us, could we forgive them? And so a lot of time it's a projection of our own inability to forgive. And so that's what's going on one level. But the rabbis take it another level, which they say there's something else here that you didn't know about, we didn't know about, but makes sense from the standpoint of what might have been going on. And that is that the brothers had been eating together when they had gotten together for family occasions, for holidays and bar mitzvahs and things like that. I don't know, whatever they got together for, anniversaries. I don't know what the Egyptian equivalent of Buka de Beppo was or whatever, because that, of course, is Joseph's basement. But anyways, the question is, what happened to them when they sat around the table? And that is that as long as Jacob was alive, Joseph got to sit at the head of the table. Why? Because Jacob wanted that way. He wanted Joseph to sit at the place where the father would sit. But the problem is now he's gone, and Joseph didn't feel like he could do that in front of his older brothers. On the other hand, he didn't really have a choice, because he's the ruler of Egypt, and if he's the ruler of Egypt, he can't be he can't be seated even with his family. He can't be seated at a place without honor. So what does he do? He decides it's best for us not to sit down and have a meal together at all. The brothers don't know that. They don't know what Joseph's thinking was. And so they just assume that their brother was pretending all along that he had forgiven them, and now things aren't going to be good. And so the rabbis added this other story of Joseph, of why Joseph kind of conveyed to the brothers that things had changed. And in reality, they hadn't. Joseph didn't feel any different. But of course, the brothers think that they do. So here's the Midrash on what they did. The Torah says that they gave him this message, right? This is what the Midrash tells us it was done.
But they, not fathoming his motives, sent Bilhah to him with the dying message of their father, that he was to forgive the transgression and the sin of his brothers. For the sake of the ways of peace, they had invented the message. Jacob had said nothing like it. Joseph, on his part, realized that his brothers spoke thus only because they feared he might do harm unto them, and he wept that they should put so little trust in his affection. When they appeared and fell down before his face and said, "You desire to make one of us a slave to yourself. Behold, we are all ready to be your servants." He spoke to them gently and tried to convince them that he harbored no evil design against them. He said, Be not afraid. I will do you no harm. For I fear God, and if you think I have failed to have you sit at my table because of enmity towards you, God knows the intentions of my heart. He knows that I acted thus out of consideration for the respect I owe to you.
Wow. So he tells them, well, before he even tells them, look who they, according to the Midrash, delivered the message. Bilhah, the last remaining wife of Jacob, or concubine, whatever. But she represents that generation. So it's not the brothers that actually send the message. It's Bilhah who's given the message. And so this kind of idea that, like, you know, Bilhah as Joseph's stepmother, as a representative of that generation, she's the one who can give the message because, again, she represents that generation. So this, you know, that's not in the Torah, that Bilhah has this role to play. But again, Joseph is upset. His reaction to his brothers is that he's upset that they don't trust him, and he's upset that again, you know, that they think he's was just doing this because their father was alive. So it basically means that he never forgave them. He never felt any affection for them. So he tells them the line from the Torah, I'm not going to do anything to you. And again, they say to him, look, you were going to make one of us, you were going to take one of us hostage when the whole incident with trying to get Benjamin and that whole scene. He says, the brothers basically say, we'll all be your slave, your servants. And so they basically say, you know, this is kind of your dream again coming true, Joseph. You know, we're all now preparing to bow down and be your servants. So here's Joseph, the rest of Joseph's words to his brothers. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Hold on.
Furthermore, he said, you are like the dust of the earth. Whoa. I got to move your faces out of the way. You are like the dust of the earth, the sand on the seashore, and the stars in the heavens. Can I do anything to put these out of the world? 10 stars could affect nothing against 1 star. How much less can 1 star affect anything against 10? Do you believe that I have a power of acting contrary to the laws of nature? 12 hours have the day, 12 hours the night, 12 months the year, 12 constellations are in the heavens, and also there are 12 tribes. You are the trunk and I am the head. Of what use the head without the trunk? It is to my own good that I should treat you with fraternal affection. Before your advent, I was looked upon as a slave in this country. You proved me a man of noble birth. Now, if I should kill you, my claims upon an aristocratic lineage would be shown to be a lie. The Egyptians would say he was not their brother. They were strangers to him, but he called them his brothers to serve his purpose. And now he has found a pretext to put them out of the way. Or they would hold me to be a man of no probity. Who plays false with his own kith and kin? How can he keep faith with others? And in sooth, how can I venture to lay hand upon those whom God and my father both have blessed?
So there's a lot of answers he gives for why he's not going to do anything to them. You have a whole bunch of them, you know, which is, okay, fine. You know, if I am the head, I'm nothing without you. You're the trunk. I can't exist without you. And he basically says, look, all the things that are 12, this is the way things are supposed to be. There's 12, the 12 tribes are like part of the fabric of the universe, right? You know, there is necessary, the 12 tribes are as necessary as the natural order, if you will, everything, the laws of nature. So he says that, you know, this is the way things are supposed to be. But then there's a really weird reasoning here, which is that if I kill you, then no one's going to believe my story that I've been telling all along, which is that I'm not really a slave. So he basically gives them he basically says, look, it's not even in my interest to kill you. I don't, I can't kill you because it doesn't make me look good. So even if you think that I'm just saying this to you for, to lull you into some false sense of security, the reality is that it doesn't behoove me to kill you. And then, of course, he finishes with this: how can I hurt people who God has blessed? My Father has blessed. So these are things that all kind of soothe them and make them feel a little bit better. But there is this real question: is did they ever get a good night's sleep? I mean, did these brothers ever think that things were really, really okay? Again, Joseph gives so many answers. Again, the Torah says, I went back and shared the Torah here. Joseph said to them, have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? Besides, although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, so as to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. And so fear not, I will sustain you and your children. Thus he reassured them kindly, speaking kindly to them. So, he tells them that, this is God's plan. This was the way, that's what the Torah says. But of course, the Midrash adds these other things here to it, which are, I think as people kind of read the story, they thought, yeah, what about this? What about that? These are all things that are also part of kind of the reality of who Joseph was, and, kind of human nature too. All right. So that's that really powerful scene, which again is very relevant for this time of year, thinking about forgiveness and whether we ever really feel that we've been forgiven. Can we be forgiven? Do we forgive ourselves? I mean, that's the other thing. Can we forgive others, but can we forgive ourselves? Do we allow ourselves the ability to be forgiven, even when the person that's been affected by our actions is only ourselves? We have that within ourselves. I mean, we have that. It doesn't take another person or external, agent. It's really ourselves sometimes that we have to kind of get over the hump of forgiving and accepting forgiveness from. So that is an interesting and again very relevant scene. I'm glad we got to read it this time of the year. So we'll read a little bit more about Joseph's time, and then we're going to read some interesting midrash about Osnat, about Joseph's life.
As Joseph's dealings were kind and gentle with his brothers, so he was the helper and counselor of the Egyptians. And when Pharaoh departed this life, Joseph being then a man of 71 years of age, the king's last wish was that he might be a father to his son and successor Magron, and administer the affairs of state for him. Some of the Egyptians desired to make Joseph king after the death of Pharaoh, but this plan met with opposition on the part of others. They objected to an alien on the throne, and so the royal title was left to Magron, called Pharaoh, according to the established custom, the name given to all the Egyptian kings. But Joseph was made the actual ruler of the land, and though he was only viceroy in Egypt, he reigned as king over the lands outside of Egypt as far as the Euphrates, parts of which Joseph had acquired by conquest. The inhabitants of these countries brought their yearly tribute to him and other presents besides, and thus did Joseph rule for 40 years, beloved of all and respected by the Egyptians and the other nations. And during all that time his brothers dwelt in Goshen, happy and blithe in the service of God. And in his own family circle, Joseph was happy also. He lived to act as godfather at the circumcision of the sons of his grandson, Machir.
Wow. So, well, actually, let's read the last paragraph and we'll go back.
His end was premature as compared with that of his brothers. At his death, he was younger than any of them at their death. It is true, dominion buries him that exercises it. He died 10 years before his allotted time because, without taking umbrage, he had permitted his brothers to call his father his servant in his presence.
Yeah. So the rabbis tried to figure out, why did Joseph not live very long compared to the patriarchs, right? We've talked about it before. He lives 110 years, which is not even 120 years that if you deserve your full time, if you will. 120 is like, you know, according to tradition, that's like the most you can have. So he doesn't get the most you can have. The other patriarchs actually get more than the most. As we mentioned before, Isaac gets 180 years. So he gets a lifespan plus another 60 years, a life and a half, if you will. But Joseph doesn't. Joseph actually gets under the 120. So the rabbis wanted to know why. What did he do to deserve? Again, it's a pretty long life, but it's not long compared to his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and brothers. And so they kind of come up with a couple of answers here. One is that he disrespected his father. And for that, even though he was pretty good otherwise, he loses some time, loses 10 years. But the rabbis give another really interesting answer here, which is dominion buries him that exercises it, which is that when you serve in power, you age faster. So if you've ever seen pictures of, especially young presidents before and after they leave office, it is they're interesting photos. And by the way, it goes back to the first photos we have of presidents, because if you look at what Lincoln looked like when he came into office and, when he was right before he was assassinated, it didn't look possible that, it'd only been, 6 years or so since he had been elected. He looked like he aged literally 20 years. And I mean, needless to say, there were a lot of pictures of Obama, what he looked like after his presidency. There's this understanding in tradition, not just Jewish tradition, but again, in probably world tradition, that it does age you. Power brings stress, and that it does affect your lifespan. There are, of course, obvious counter examples to that. Obviously, the Queen of England would be one of them, but for the most part, it was seen, especially if you had a lot of stress, that it did cause oftentimes people not to live a full life. So those are the reasons that the Midrash gives that Joseph died, because we don't have them in the Torah. But we do know, according to tradition, that he does get to see his great-grandsons, which is pretty cool. That's a pretty good thing to live to. And we also read in the Midrash that the Egyptians wanted him, or at least some Egyptians wanted him to be the Pharaoh. That when the Pharaoh died, that this next Pharaoh, and again, according to the Midrash, the name is Magron, which is Greek name, but probably, again, we don't have a a Pharaoh named Magron in the Egyptian records. Whether it was a Tutmosis or Amenhotep or whoever it was that was the Pharaoh that's actually the Pharaoh at this time, the point is that there is a Midrash that Joseph was supposed to, or at least some people wanted him to take over, but they said, you can't. As a non-Egyptian, you can't have you do that. It also says, of course, that the Egyptians at this point had tremendous territorial expansion, and some of it was due to Joseph himself. That Joseph had acquired some of these new parts of the kingdom. Again, as far away as the Euphrates, as far away as Babylonia. That, again, this has been early Babylonia, the first Babylonian city-states and Sumerian areas. But interesting Midrash that Joseph was really successful also militarily for the Egyptians. We are going to come back to Joseph again, but we're now going to kind of go backwards in time to stuff about Joseph, because the Midrash, or at least the way that they organized this collection, we're going to read about Joseph and Osnat, which we didn't read the Midrash exists. There's Midrash that exists about Joseph and his wife in many sources. Actually, there's a very old source called Joseph and Osnat, which was written about 2,000 years ago. It's called a novel, but it's not a novel. It's about 8 pages, but it's a novella maybe, but it's a story, and it's a story about Joseph and Osnat, and it kind of gets to the point of how did this woman become part of Joseph's life? Now, again, we have a midrash that she's actually descendant of Jacob, that she is Jacob's granddaughter through Dinah, through the rape of Dinah, that this is one possibility. But there's another possibility that the rabbis or contemporaries of the rabbis threw out there, which is, it doesn't seem to be the case. It says right in the Bible that she's the daughter of Potipharah, an Egyptian. So let's throw out this idea that she's the daughter of an Egyptian priest and that she's very much an Egyptian. And let's see what would happen if Joseph marries an Egyptian woman, a good Egyptian woman, a respectable and high-ranking Egyptian woman. What would that story look like? What would a story of a Jew in Egypt, recently promoted from being a slave and being in prison, to being now married to, according to the Torah, the daughter of Egyptian priest? And again, recognition, the Torah says that this was Pharaoh's matchmaking, that Pharaoh did this. But the Midrash, again, this version of a story, which again is 2,000 years old, gives us some really interesting backstory on Osnat, who we don't know a lot about. So Asenat, or Osnat in Hebrew. Here we go.
Asenat. God gives every man the wife he deserves, and so Asenat was worthy of being the helpmeet of Joseph the Pious. Her father was Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's magnates, ranking among the most distinguished of them by reason of wisdom, wealth, and station. His daughter was slender, like Sarah, beautiful, like Rebecca, and radiant in appearance, like Rachel.
Let's pause right there. So again, there's nothing about Leah there, but Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel, the matriarchs that we are at least described in certain places in the Torah as beautiful. Why do we know that? Because Sarah was almost made an Egyptian princess herself, right? Or was, but short-lasting relationship. Then there's also the story of being with Avimelech. Then there's a story of Rebecca being with Avimelech, or a different Avimelech. Then we have the fact that Rachel is beautiful and Jacob falls in love with her because of her beauty. We have stories of these women, these matriarchs, being so beautiful that people can't keep their eyes off of them, can't help themselves.
To make sure I'm.
So Osnat is like those women, even though she's not Hebrew, even though she's not Jewish, she's not Israelite, she's not from the people. She looks like these radiant, beautiful women. So it's a little bit of the fairy tale aspect of this story, which you'll see is very fairy tale-like. Yep.
Noblemen and princes sued for her hand when she was 18 years of age. Even Pharaoh's appointed successor, his firstborn son, demanded her in marriage, but his father refused to comply with his wish because he did not consider her a proper wife for one destined to sit upon the throne. The daughter of the Moabite king, he insisted, was a more suitable match for him. But Asnat rejected every proposal of marriage and avoided all intercourse with men. With 7 maidens born the same day as herself, she lived in retirement in a magnificent palace adjoining that of her parents.
Sounds a little bit like a fairy tale, right? Now, this is, I will say that there is layers to this story that are more recent, but some of this, I mean, more recent, going 500 years, but the majority of this story goes back 2,000 years. We have a version of this story. We actually have 4 versions of this story that go back 2,000 years, 4 different extant copies of this that made their way into pretty much survived because of the church. But, and I'll get into that in a second, because this actually became a few years ago. It's probably 10, 15 years ago. This, like, Joseph and Osnat's story, somebody wrote a paper about it, and it made everybody go nuts. But the story does go back 2,000 years. So it does sound very fairy tale-like, I promise. There are versions of this story that are even much older than, it's not Grimm's fairy tale stuff. This is old stuff. So we'll see the really weird part of this in a second.
It happened in the first of the 7 years of plenty that Joseph planned to visit the place in which Potiphar resided, and he sent word to him that he would put up with him at his house. Potiphar was enchanted with the honor in prospect for him, and also with the opportunity it would afford of bringing about a marriage between Osnat and Joseph. But when he disclosed his plan to his daughter, she rejected it with indignation. "Why should you desire to see me united with a vagabond, a slave?" she cried out. "One that does not even belong to our nation, but is the son of a Canaanitish herdsman, a fellow that attempted to violate the honor of his mistress, and in punishment for this misdemeanor was thrown into prison, to be liberated thence by Pharaoh for interpreting his dream. No, father, never will I become his wife. I am willing to marry the son of Pharaoh, the future ruler and king of Egypt."
Wow. So she definitely is not interested in a Jew. She's not interested in a guy who has the story. In this version of the story, it definitely doesn't seem like it's the same Potiphar, which it doesn't say. This says Potiphera in the Torah. But it definitely doesn't seem like the same Potiphar, that this would be the daughter, but we do have a midrash that it is the same. We have another place we read already that Osnat was Potiphar. Yeah, that same Potiphar whose wife tried to rape Joseph, that he ends up marrying the daughter, right? And that, she knew that the family, that he would be part of the family. She just didn't realize that it was her daughter. It's very creepy in a very Mrs. Robinson way. But this story is following kind of more of the Torah, which is, this is a different Potiphar. This is a different individual who doesn't know, who hasn't interacted with Joseph, but really would like to interact with Joseph. He'd really like his daughter to be married to her, because again, he knows that Joseph is up and coming and pretty much as good as you can get, with the exception of being the Pharaoh. This is a good person for his daughter to marry, but his daughter isn't interested. In the story, in this fairy tale, no, I'm not interested. So another one of these stories of a king who has a daughter who playing hard to get. Here we go.
Potiphar promised his daughter not to speak of the plan again. At that moment, Joseph's arrival was announced, and Osnat left the presence of her parents and withdrew to her own apartments. Standing by the window, she saw Joseph pass, and she was so transported with his divine beauty and his indescribably noble carriage that she burst into tears and said, "Poor foolish me, what shall I do? I permitted myself to be misled by friends who told me that Joseph was the son of a Canaanitish shepherd. Now I behold the splendor that emanates from him like to the splendor of the sun, illuminating our house with his rays. In my audacity and folly, I had looked down upon him and had spoken absurd nonsense against him. I knew not that he was a son of God, as he must be, for among men such beauty as his does not exist. I pray you, O God of Joseph, grant me pardon. It was my ignorance that made me speak like a fool. If my father will give me in marriage to Joseph, I will be his forever."
Right. Well, beautiful story of her falling in love with him just based on looking at him, but I don't want to delve into that too much. But it's such a powerful revelation. It literally is a religious experience for her. She says, "Oh God of Joseph." So she's like, I'll pray to that God. Whatever. If I can be married to him, this would be great. So she completely shifts So originally no interest, and now, oh, I have to marry him. So Sandy pointed out, isn't Potiphar, the original Potiphar, the first Potiphar, a eunuch? Yeah, it does seem like he's a eunuch, or at least that was, again, the version of the story. There's an interesting midrash that the reason why he's referred to as Potipharah the second time is because after he had a daughter, and at some point when he became the eunuch or was the eunuch, he actually was referred to as Potipharah, which is a feminine version of the name because he no longer is in possession of his full manhood, if you will. So there is an interesting midrash that Potiphar became Potipharah when he became a eunuch and already after he had a child. So is it possible? Yes, all those things are possible. This midrash, though, or this legend or tale, if you will, is definitely more along the lines that this is a whole different person now. And you'll see. I mean, you'll see from other parts of this later on. It's a different. It's a seems to be, again, from like almost a whole different part of Joseph's life. So let's take a look at what happens when they decide to be a couple.
In the meantime, Joseph had taken his seat at Potiphar's table, and he observed a maiden looking at him from one of the palace windows. He commanded that she be ordered away, for he never permitted women to gaze at him or come near to him. His supernatural beauty always fascinated the noble Egyptian ladies, and they were untiring in their efforts they made to approach him. But their attempts were vain. He cherished the words of his father Jacob, who had admonished his son to keep aloof from the women of the Gentiles.
Yeah, so we've seen this already, right, with the explanations for why Joseph, first of all, was the original Potiphar's wife can't stop herself because she's drawn to his supernatural beauty. But he remembers his father Jacob, who said, never have anything to do with the shiksas, and so this was this version of the story that makes it they both came from a place where they never would have been together, right? There's no way they could be together. Joseph, for reasons that go back to his father and to his own holiness and what was he supposed to do? I mean, in some extent, maybe that made him even more desirable amongst the Egyptian women because he wasn't interested and didn't even want them to look at him. And of course, Osnat kind of feeling that she shouldn't be married off to a guy like this. So, but here's what happens. Story, the beautiful love story.
Potiphar explained to Joseph that the maiden at the window was his virgin daughter, who never permitted men to abide near her. He was the first man she had ever looked upon. The father continued and made the request of Joseph to allow his daughter to pay him her respects. Joseph granted the favor he desired, and Osnat appeared and greeted him with the words, "Peace be with you, you blessed of God Most High," whereto Joseph returned the salutation. "Be you blessed of the Lord, from whom flow all blessings."
Right. So he blesses, he basically, she blesses him, right? She uses this very biblical kind of blessing, and he blesses her back. So it seems like, they're off to a good start. Let's keep going.
Osnat desired also to kiss Joseph, but he warded off the intimate greeting with these words: "It is not meet that a God-fearing man who blesses the living God and eats the blessed bread of life, who drinks of the blessed cup of immortality and incorruptibility, and anoints himself with the fragrant oil of holiness, should kiss a woman of a strange people, who blesses dead and unprofitable idols, and eats the putrid bread of idolatry, which chokes the soul of man, who drinks the libations of deceit, and anoints herself with the oil of destruction."
Wow, that is pretty heavy duty
Pretty harsh.
I want nothing to do. I want nothing to do with you or your body, and you know, you
And the horse you rode in on.
your whole pagan lifestyle is something I don't want to come anywhere near me. All right, but what happens here?
These words uttered by Joseph touched Osnat to tears. Out of compassion with her, he bestowed his blessing upon her, calling upon God to pour out his spirit over her and make her to become a member of his people and his inheritance, and grant her a portion in the life eternal.
Yep. Now, this seems to be, this is kind of an interesting situation of somebody becoming Jewish, who was least likely to become Jewish. How does this happen? And so this version of the story, or this I don't like keep calling it a midrash because it's not really a midrash. This was definitely written by a Greek writer, a Greek Jewish writer, but not rabbinic. It's not like other rabbinic midrash. But again, it's very old, and I'm going to share with you some of what has been written about it, because there is some stuff that's been written about this that some people claim is actually about Christianity. But let's just keep in mind that this is all based on the fact that for Jews and maybe some early Christians, how does someone who's not Jewish become part of the people? And again, we have the story of Ruth, we have the story of Naaman, we have stories of Gentiles who become Jewish, but we know that Moses marries, a woman who we know that he marries a woman who was a Midianite, Zipporah. But there does seem to be this kind of weird. Well, you could make the argument that Judah marries Tamar, or has children with Tamar, and she's not Israelite. But that wasn't like the way things were supposed to happen. Joseph is one of the 12 tribes, and this is an issue of who is Osnat. How does she get in to be part of the people? How does she get married to Joseph? One of the most important, definitely, if not the most important one of Jacob's sons, definitely the one that you can't just ignore it. I'm not that if Don or Naphtali or Asher, one of these other children, married somebody who was a Canaanite, would it have made any difference? We don't know, but we definitely have the story of Osnat. And so let's read what Osnat does, or what Joseph does too.
The marriage of Joseph. The appearance and the speech of Joseph made so deep an impression upon Osnat that no sooner had she reached her apartment than she divested herself of her robes of state and took off her jewels and put on sackcloth instead, strewed ashes upon her head, and supplicated God amid tears to grant her pardon for her sins. In this manner she spent 7 days and 7 nights in her chamber. Not even her 7 attendants were permitted to enter her presence during the time of her penance. The morning of the 8th day, an angel appeared to her and bade her put away her sackcloth and ashes and array herself in state. For this day she had been born anew, he said, to eat the blessed bread of life, to drink the cup of life immortal, and anoint herself with the oil of life eternal. Osnat was about to set food and drink before her guest when she perceived a honeycomb of wondrous form and fragrance. The angel explained to her that it had been produced by the bees of paradise to serve as food for the angels and the elect of God. He took a small portion of it for himself, and the rest he put into Osnat's mouth saying, "From this day forth your body shall bloom like the eternal flowers in paradise. Your bones will wax fat like the cedars thereof. Strength inexhaustible shall be yours. Your youth shall never fade, and your beauty never perish, and you shall be like a metropolis surrounded by a wall." At the request of Osnat, the angel blessed also her 7 attendants with the words, "May the Lord bless you and make you to be 7 pillars in the city of refuge."
Yeah. Now, yeah, it's pretty wild. There's a whole lot in there that's pretty wild, but one of the biggest issues here is the strange, um, the strange ritual that goes on here with eating this this honeycomb, and that this is divine food. So a few years ago, it's actually about 6 or 7 years ago. Now I'm looking at it. I'll share this right now. There was some people wrote. It was in. I mean, made Fox News. It made some other places. You know, I don't. There's links to it, but I mean, it made a lot of the Fox News ones. There's actually still an open link, but there were. This was. This was. This was a response to it from a DPhil student at Oxford University at the Oriental Institute, who talks about the fact that this is a response to the claim that the version of Joseph and Osnat was actually a secret version of the story of the marriage of Jesus to Mary Magdalene. Why? It just kind of was a sensationalist, you know, like, look what we discovered. Basically his point is that there's no reason to believe that the story is about Jesus and Mary. There's nothing, Mary Magdalene. There's nothing in here that, you know, would lead us to say that this is what this is about. So, you know, it says here, Christians saw in a popular figure like Joseph some elements of Jesus's ministry. Yes, but not necessarily so much so that everything that happened in Joseph's life is a parallel, as a secret version of what happened in Jesus's life. And so here they said that the story was censored. A good conspiracy theory always helps improvable claims. In the oldest Syriac manuscript, which again, Syriac is a Aramaic, dialect. The end of the letter from the translator in the first chapter is lost. It appears that this letter was just about to provide some interpretation about the story. The authors of the book suggest it was torn because it said the story was really about Jesus and not Joseph. I mean, that's literally saying that we don't have it and it must have been censored. That's why we don't have it, and it was saying something about Jesus. I mean, there's not really any basis for this other than, again, people, especially after, you know, the Da Vinci Code and other sensational stuff over the last couple of decades, are looking for this version of Jesus that he had a family. So people look for it even when there's no basis for it. I will tell you that the story is a very weird story by itself, but because there's this kind of like Eucharistic thing that Osnat does, maybe, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty far-fetched in that the simple kind of answer here is that they're talking about a conversion for a woman who can't go through a conversion because there's no Beit Din, there's no court, there's no group that can say she's Jewish now. Who's gonna say she's Jewish? And that maybe more than anything is also reflective of the fact that she was very high up in the Egyptian royal, you know, in the hierarchy, and it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like there's the Torah doesn't give us anything about how she's married to Joseph, how this was acceptable. And so, we have this beautiful story about how she made herself, played hard to get, and then becomes very agitated and very, very excited about Joseph and being able to marry. And so now we have angels that literally kind of help make this happen, because there was literally like a miraculous element to this, how Osnat gets, how she's made acceptable. So the angels are involved in this. Let's read what happens.
Thereupon the angel left her, and she saw him ascend heavenward in a chariot of fire drawn by 4 steeds of fire. Now she knew that she had not been entertaining a human being, but an angel. The celestial messenger had scarcely departed when a visit from Joseph was announced, and she hastened to array and adorn herself for his reception. When she washed her face, she caught sight of it in the water, and saw it to be of such beauty as never before. So great had been the transformation wrought by the angel. When Joseph came, he did not recognize her. He asked her who she was, whereto she replied, I am your maidservant, Osnat. I have cast away my idols, and this day a visitant came to me from heaven. He gave me to eat of the bread of life and to drink of the blessed cup, and he spoke these words to me, I give you to Joseph as his affianced wife, that he may be your affianced husband forever or forever. And furthermore, he said, your name shall not any more be called Osnat, but your name shall be City of Refuge, where the nations shall flee for safety. And he added, I go to Joseph to tell him all these things that have reference to you. Now, my lord, you know whether the man was with you and spoke to you in my behalf.
Wow. So she tells him everything that happened. And she said the angel was going from me to you. And she looks different. Obviously, the experience, the religious conversion makes her look different. And Joseph says,
Joseph confirmed all she had said, and they embraced and kissed each other in token of their betrothal, which they celebrated by a banquet with Potiphar and his wife. The wedding took place later in the presence of Pharaoh, who set a golden crown upon the head of the bridegroom and the bride, gave them his blessing, and made a 7 days feast in their honor, to which he invited the magnates and princes of Egypt and of other countries. And during the 7 days of the wedding festivities, the people were prohibited, under penalty of death, from doing any manner of work. They were all to join in the celebration of Joseph's marriage.
happily ever after. It's the closest thing to a Jewish fairy tale that you can get, and it's 2,000 years old. I mean, it is very old, and people would like to probably read into it other other great lessons from it. It definitely seems, I don't know, it seems to me to be an entertaining story of miracles and love that there had to be angelic interaction in order to make it that wanted it to be that wanted it was meant to be whatever. I don't know. I mean, look, there's so much legend about Joseph. I mean, you forget we've been reading it for months. So Sandy just asked, what was Potiphar's wife? According to tradition, it's the Midrash, it's Zuleika. Now the Torah doesn't say it just says Potiphar's wife, but according to tradition, it's Zuleika. Osnat is actually mentioned. I mean, she's named by the Torah. And interestingly, Osnat for a long, long time was not a common Jewish name. I mean, more than anything because it's recognized as an Egyptian name, which I mean, there are other names that are based on pagan. They're based on pagan names, like, for example, Esther, Ishtar, the goddess of beauty. But recently in Hebrew, in Israel, and I'm talking about like the last 30 or 40 years. Osnat's become a really popular Hebrew name. Like a lot of Israeli women that are in their 30s and 40s are named Osnat. And you know, I remember maybe 50s even now. I remember starting to meet people whose names were Osnat in America. And I'm like, that's not a good name to have in America. It just doesn't. And I remember meeting, Israeli kids, when they came to America in the 70s or 80s, and, girl's name would be Osnat. I'm like, you're going to have to, that's not going to, it's going to be hard to have that name here. It's not an easy name to carry in English. But it wasn't really a common, not at all. It was not a common Jewish name at all, Osnat. And now, again, I think because of the legends about her and in the Bible, she's held out as a special woman in the Midrash. Again, just righteous woman that she became a popular name, and it is Egyptian, but she has a nickname, which is the City of Refuge, which seems like a kind of an interesting name. It's an idea in the Torah that there are cities where people go to, and if they've committed accidental manslaughter, accidental homicide, that they can go to one of these cities of refuge. But she's in the Midrash, again, we have these legends about her, that she's not just beautiful, but that she's really, really righteous and virtuous. And she's virtuous, as you can see from the Midrash, because she doesn't let even a guy look at her. But according to tradition, she also, and we already read this, she took good care of her father-in-law, Jacob. She was very dutiful daughter-in-law. Well, let's read a little bit about that too, because we're going to read a little bit about Osnat in regards to the rest of the family. So here's what it says.
Kind and unkind brothers. On the 21st day of the second month in the second of the 7 years of famine, Jacob came down to Egypt, and his daughter Osnat visited him. She marveled not a little at his beauty and strength. His shoulders and his arms were like an angel's, and his loins like a giant. Jacob gave her his blessing, and with her husband she returned home, accompanied by the sons of Leah, while the sons of the handmaids, remembering the evil they had once done to Joseph, kept aloof. Levi, in particular, had conceived a fondness for Osnat. He was especially close to the living God, for he was a prophet and a sage. His eyes were open, and he knew how to read the celestial books written by the finger of God. He revealed to Osnat that he had seen her future resting place in heaven, and it was built upon a rock and encompassed by a diamond wall.
Wow, hold it one second. This is going to be a weird section here, because now we read about what happened with Osnat and the brothers and Jacob. And the first part is kind of a weird statement, which is that she's very impressed by her father-in-law. It's a little creepy, but I guess it's not uncommon, but it is interesting that again, there's differences between Jacob and Joseph. There's definitely similarities, but there are differences, and there seems to be this difference here that's alluded to, is that Jacob is a little bit more of a a big guy, stark as we say in Yiddish. That he's a big man, and Joseph is a little bit more, as we've already read, a little bit more effeminate. I mean, beautiful, but almost as beautiful as a woman. I mean, beautiful in a kind of a androgynous way, or whatever you want to say. The Midrash seems to point this out, that again, compared to Joseph, Jacob is a man's man, if you will. Whatever is not politically correct to say right now when it comes to gender identity and virility, if you will. So this is an interesting midrash, and it also tells us that there is this weird dynamic that when Osnat is introduced to the rest of the family, that different family members have different feelings about her. And that what plays out here in this relationship between Joseph and his brothers, and not only Joseph but his wife, is a little bit more complicated than the Torah would lead us to believe, that it was just kind of a happily ever after situation for the family with regards to Osnat. So let's read. Again, it says that Levi has a good feeling for her because he realizes that because he has prophetic gifts, that she's going to heaven. And she's not just going to heaven, but she's like in a beautiful place in heaven. So it's nice. That's not it, though.
On their journey, they met the son of Pharaoh, his successor to the throne, and he was so transported with Osnat's beauty that he made the plan of murdering Joseph in order to secure possession of his wife. He summoned Shimon and Levi, and by blandishments and promises, sought to induce them to put Joseph out of the way. Shimon was so enraged that he would have felled him at once, had not his brother Levi, who was endowed with the gift of prophecy, divined his purpose and frustrated it by stepping on his foot while whispering, "Why are you so angry and so wroth with the man? We that fear God may not repay evil with evil." Turning to the son of Pharaoh, he told him that nothing would induce them to execute the wickedness he had proposed. Rather, he advised him not to undertake anything against Joseph, else he would kill him with the sword that had served him in his slaughter of the inhabitants of Shechem. The culprit was seized with frantic alarm and fell down before Shimon and Levi to entreat their mercy. Levi raised him up, saying, "Fear not, but abandon your wicked plan and harbor no evil design against Joseph."
Yep. So Joseph's brothers now have had a chance to not only come to his defense, but these really violent guys, Shimon and Levi, when Pharaoh's son says, look, help me get rid of him and I'll pay you for it, they threaten him and say, we'll kill you. And so Shimon seems to be even more hot-headed than Levi, but yeah, these are people you don't want to upset. And the Pharaoh's son, did it so that he could get Osnat, but this is part of maybe the way things play out. You can wonder, why do we have this midrash? Well, you'll see.
Nevertheless, the son of Pharaoh did not give up his criminal purpose. He approached the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah and taught to accomplish through them what had failed with Shimon and Levi. He called them into his presence and told them of a conversation between Joseph and Pharaoh that he had overheard. The former had said he waited but to learn of the death of his father Jacob in order to do away with the sons of the handmaids, because they had been the ones to sell him into slavery. Their wrath excited against Joseph by these words, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah assented to the proposition of the son of Pharaoh. It was arranged that the latter should kill Pharaoh, the friend of Joseph, while they would fall upon their brother and put him out of the way. They were furnished with 600 able warriors and 50 spearmen for the purpose. The first part of the plan, the murder of Pharaoh, failed. The palace guard would not allow even the successor to the throne to enter his father's bedchamber, and he had to depart without having effected his object. Now Dan and Gad gave him the advice to take up his station with 50 archers in a secret place that Osnat had to pass on her homeward journey. Thence he could make a successful attack upon her suite and gain possession of her. Naphtali and Asher did not care to have anything to do with this hostile enterprise against Joseph, but Dan and Gad forced them into it, insisting that all the sons of the handmaids must stand together as men and repel the danger that threatened them.
So what's so interesting about this Midrash here that was placed at the end, I mean, the way Ginsburg put it at the end, was interesting because it shows that the brothers were not all in agreement when it came to Joseph, that maybe things were not as cool amongst the family as you thought. Again, they kind of throw under the bus the sons that are not sons of Rachel and Leah. And so they have them involved in this this plan, which isn't just a plan to get Pharaoh's son, the Osnat, but also to get him into get him into the position of being Pharaoh. So this is a pretty wild, this is, look, it's probably based on, stories and reality of what people did when they wanted to get power. But it doesn't make the sons of Jacob look very good, at least some of them. And it's not good. I mean, it's not a good story about the brothers, especially Dan and Gad. Those two of these sons of the four sons, Naphtali and Asher, Dan and Gad, the four sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. It's not good. It's not a good story. Maybe it's a good story. It's not a nice story about the 12 tribes. So again, it's maybe not one that you've heard. It's not a very well-known midrash necessarily, but it is, again, there is this understanding that the brothers kind of did some bad stuff, even after they're in Egypt. And they get caught up in this Egyptian palace intrigue, if you will. Anybody want to make any other comments about this strange story of again, it's not one that you maybe knew about. It's not one that it's not a really nice story, and it's not over. Let's read what happens.
Treachery punished. From their ambush, the forces of the son of Pharaoh fell upon Osnat and her 600 attendants. They succeeded in hewing down the vanguard, and Osnat had to take flight. To her alarm, she encountered the son of Pharaoh with 50 mounted men. Benjamin, seated in the same chariot with her, came to her rescue, for in spite of his youth, he was exceedingly courageous. He descended from the chariot, gathered pebbles, and throwing them at the son of Pharaoh, struck him on his forehead and inflicted a severe wound. The charioteer aided him by keeping him supplied with pebbles, which he cast at the 50 riders with such expert skill that he slew 48 of them with as many missiles. Meantime, the sons of Leah arrived on the spot and came to Osnat's aid, for Levi, with his prophetic spirit, had seen what was happening, and summoning his 5 brothers, he had hastened there. These 6 attacked the troops in ambush and cut them down, but the danger to Osnat was by no means removed. At this moment, the sons of the handmaids threw themselves upon her and Benjamin with drawn swords. It was their intention to kill them both and flee to cover in the depths of the woods. But as soon as Asnat supplicated God for aid, the swords dropped from the hands of her assailants, and they saw that the Lord was on the side of Asnat. They fell at her feet and entreated her grace. She allayed their anxiety with the words, "Be courageous and have no fear of your brothers, the sons of Leah. They are God-fearing men. Do but keep yourselves in hiding until their wrath is appeased."
Wow. So this is such a strange kind of story here in many ways, but it also shows how great Osnat is. I mean, really here, that she's able to get a miracle happen. They can't do anything with her because she prays and the swords fall out of her hands, and she said, and then they realize that she's got these powers, and which, by the way, seems to imply that they didn't know that she was so important until then, which to some extent kind of exonerates them a little bit in the sense that they didn't know any. Well, it's not that they didn't know any better, but they didn't realize that Osnat was for real. And she actually then also kind of saves their lives, because he says, you are, you're dead meat, because your brothers are they're gonna get you, and just hide for a while, let them calm down, and then you can, maybe they'll calm down and everything will be okay. They won't attack you. So she actually prevents fratricide. She prevents this from escalating. So she's pretty amazing. I mean, she not only is powerful enough to pray and have them, not hurt her, but she actually saves their lives. So it's a pretty wild scene, and she does like everything right. I mean, she could have let them get killed, and she doesn't. So it's a really wild story. I mean, this is kind of a violent, weird story. But let's read this.
When the sons of Leah appeared, Osnat fell down before them, and amid tears she adjured them to spare the sons of the handmaids and not repay evil with the evil they had meditated. Shimon would not hear of making concessions. He insisted that the measure of their sins was full and they must pay for them with their lives, for they had been the ones that had sold Joseph into slavery and brought down untold misfortune upon Jacob and his sons. But Osnat did not leave off, and her urgent petitions won the day. She succeeded in calming the anger of Shimon, and in Levi she had a secret ally, for this prophet knew the hiding place of the sons of the handmaids, and he did not betray it to Shimon, lest his wrath be increased at the sight of them. It was also Levi that restrained Benjamin from giving the death blow to the heavily wounded son of Pharaoh. So far from permitting harm to be done to him, he washed his wounds, put him into a chariot, and took him to Pharaoh, who thanked Levi from his heart for his services of loving kindness. Levi's efforts were vain. 3 days later, the son of Pharaoh died of the wounds inflicted by Benjamin and from grief over the loss of his firstborn. Pharaoh followed him soon after, departing this life at the age of 177 years. His crown he left to Joseph, who ruled over Egypt for 48 years thereafter. He, in turn, handed the crown on to the grandchild of Pharaoh, an infant in arms at the time of his grandfather's death, toward whom Joseph had acted in a father's stead all his life.
Wow. So that's an amazing version of the story. The brothers, some of Joseph's brothers turn out to not be really good people. There's a lot going on there, right? Here's the story of the Pharaoh's son, and then Pharaoh dying, which left Joseph to kind of be the caretaker. It says he literally ruled Egypt while that young boy, the grandson of Pharaoh, became old enough to rule and to take over, but that Joseph essentially raised that kid, which then, of course, then begs the question, how was there a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph in the next chapter of the Bible, which is the first chapter of Exodus? We go right from chapter 50 to chapter 1 of Exodus, and we have a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. Pretty wild. So this story is built on lots of different things. Shimon and Levi being very violent. It's based on the fact that maybe not all the brothers, all of Jacob's sons, were so good. It's based on the fact that Osnat must have been a really righteous lady and tries to help. All of these things are going on in this story. But it's a really wild story. I mean, it's really, really an interesting story of Osnat, and I mean also Joseph, but Joseph's really kind of in the background in this story. I mean, it's really what Joseph did, the rest of his life, or, what was Joseph's responsibility. Folks, we're about to read about Joseph's death. And if you think that this is very close, that we're reading about this right after we read Jacob's death, well, that's because in the Torah, that's exactly what happens, right? The one story that we have that's not about Jacob, that happens, that's not a Jacob story per se, I mean, Jacob's dead, is that the brothers have said to Joseph, Dad sent a message saying not to hurt us. Because it says Joseph buried, they buried Jacob and they came back, and that's when that story happens, where he says, everything's going to be okay. And then the next line is Joseph lived 110 years. And it says Joseph lived to see the third generation of Ephraim. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were likewise born on Joseph's eve. There it actually says, not the children in the Midrash, but his grandchildren who got to be there. And then here's Joseph's death. So it is right after. I mean, these are the last verses, and then verse 26 is Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was involved and placed in a coffin in Egypt. That's the last word of Genesis. So by the way, if anybody ever asks you, what's the last word? Egypt is the last word. It's kind of fitting that the last word in the book of Genesis is Egypt. Interestingly, by the way, and it has been noticed and pointed out before, that the book of Genesis begins, as far as location-wise, it begins in the Garden of Eden and it ends in Egypt, Genesis. So if the Garden of Eden was thought to be in the Babylonian or Mesopotamian region, which it seems as though that's the region that the Bible, I'm not going to say everybody who read the Bible feels this way, but it seems like at the face of it, the Bible, because it describes the four rivers of Eden, one of them being the Tigris and one of them being the Euphrates. The other two, the Gihon and the Pishon, are thought to be in the Middle East, in that Babylonian Fertile Crescent area. It's interesting that the book of the Bible, that is the book that sets us into motion, begins in Babylonia and ends in Egypt. And there are people who say that that's a meta statement about the Jewish people, because according to tradition, and according to the Bible itself, Abraham starts off in Ur. He starts off in Mesopotamia. And where do the Jewish people end up? Or at least some of them end up. Some of them end up back in Babylonia at the end of the book of Chronicles, or the end of the Jewish story. Some of us are back in Babylonia, but some of us are down in Egypt. And so it's kind of interesting that the book of Genesis begins in Babylonia and then ends in Egypt. And it is very possible that that's kind of a statement for where the Jews were when the Bible was edited or put together. That some of us are in Egypt and some of us are in Babylonia, and then some of us maybe are back in Israel, but we're spread out, and we're kind of in both kingdoms, both powers, if you will, both superpowers, that we're kind of been torn between these two superpowers. So it's an interesting idea. And is it meant to be a secret? Not a secret, but is it meant to be like a code inside that Joseph being in Egypt is actually kind of maybe a statement of where they are? And by the way, it is important because one of the authors, well, I don't know how to say this. One of the possible authors or editors of the Bible, early writers or early formative editors of the Bible, is Jeremiah, or his, more importantly, maybe his scribe Baruch. We know that Jeremiah is brought down to Egypt at the end of his life, or when he's exiled, that he's brought down against his will, by the way, to Egypt. And so was there an intent to put this at the end of the book of Genesis? It's very possible that this was a statement that we're in Egypt, we're not supposed to be in Egypt, but we're in Egypt. And was Joseph left in Egypt? Well, we know he's not left in Egypt because he says in verse 24, I'm about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When God, Joseph says, when God takes notice of you, carry my bones. And those are the last words that Joseph says. And quite frankly, those are the last words that a person says. Right? The last words that somebody says in the book of Genesis is, get my body out of Egypt. Was that Jeremiah? Was that Jeremiah's last words to his community, to his friends? Get me out of Egypt. Don't let me stay here. Don't let the Jewish people stay here. It's possible. It's possible that that's a meta statement about the Bible and the people who actually wrote the Bible, what they lived with. It's very possible because those are the last words. So keep that in mind. Those are facts. Those are the facts that we know for sure. That Jeremiah dies in Egypt, and he didn't want to be there. And it sure seems like Joseph doesn't want to be there either. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. Is it also very probable that Jeremiah or his circle wrote or edited a good chunk of the Bible as we have it? Yeah. And if that's the case, those two things might be connected. So let's look at the Midrash on what happens with Joseph and his burial or his death. At least first, we'll look at the death of Joseph.
The death and burial of Joseph. On his deathbed, Joseph took an oath of his brethren, and he bade them on their deathbed likewise take an oath of their sons, to carry his bones to Palestine, when God should visit them and bring them up out of the land of Egypt. He said, I that am a ruler could take my father's body up to the Holy Land while it was still intact. Of you I do but make request that you carry my bones from here, and you may inter them in any spot in Palestine. For I know that the burial place of the fathers was appointed to be the tomb of only of the three patriarchs and their three wives.
Yeah, so what he says is that I don't get to be in the cave of Machpelah. It was a set, only this amount of people can be there. Only three patriarchs could be there. As we read in the last week's Midrash, Esau wanted to be that last patriarch to make it there. And again, there is this idea that maybe Adam and Eve are buried there too. But of the patriarchs, only the three could be there, and only three of the wives, which again, Rachel is buried in this different place. She has her own tomb. So that there's these, it's like the plot only holds 6, maybe 8 people. So I can't be there. I'm not going to be there. So I don't care so much. He says, I don't really care. Just bury me in the Holy Land. Wherever that place is, Okay, wherever that place will be, you choose that place, but just bury me in the land of Israel. Here we go.
Joseph took the oath to carry his remains along with them when they left Egypt from his brothers and not from his sons, to bury him at once in Palestine, for he feared the Egyptians would not give the latter permission to transport his bones, even if they recalled what Joseph had been allowed to do with his father's body. They would object that Joseph had been the viceroy, and a wish preferred by one of so high an estate could not be denied. Furthermore, he adjured his brothers not to leave Egypt until a Redeemer should appear and announce his message with the words, Pakod, I have surely visited you, a tradition which Joseph had received from his father, who had it from Isaac, and Isaac in turn had heard it from Abraham. And he told them that God would redeem Israel through Moses as through the Messiah, in this world as in the world to come, and the Egyptian redemption would begin in Tishrei, when Israel would be freed from slave labor, and would be completed in the following Nisan, when they would leave Egypt.
Right. Let's mention that for just a moment, because we're just started the month of Tishrei, right? We are we are at the beginning of the redemption. According to the rabbis, to some extent, or at least one version of the Midrash of the Exodus, that it took 6 months. So sometimes people say, well, how long did the plagues last for, right? It doesn't really say. It doesn't say how long that cumulative period of plagues lasted for. So there's a Midrash that it lasted for 6 months. That the first thing that happened, the Nile turning to blood, happened during Tishrei. But that eventually, when we finally get the release after the 10th plague, that happened, of course, on Passover. So interesting idea. That takes 6 months. But that's the end part. The other part is that Joseph is literally setting up what are the code words? How do we know? How do we know when Moses is going to redeem us? How do we know that he is the right guy? Because he uses the word pakod. That is the secret. So if the guy comes forward and says the word, then we know that that's the word. What's interesting about that is, of course, the Midrash said that there will be a time when God will redeem us through the Messiah, and it will follow the same kinds of thing, which is that there'll be a code word, and we'll know with that code word that this is the Messiah. And again, maybe there's a feeling that our redemption, the Messianic redemption, would also happen at Tishrei at this time of year, or at least begin to happen. Even if it took 6 months, that it would be our redemption would happen now at this time, and would kind of be a revisitation of our leaving Egypt. Yeah. So there is this other idea, of course, that Joseph isn't going to be ever allowed to leave Egypt, ever. Now, is it because he was the viceroy, or because he's a good luck charm? This possibility that Joseph has to ask for this because he knows it's not going to be easy to do. That getting him out is going to take a miracle. And we'll read that when we get to leaving Egypt part, how miraculous it was for them to get Joseph's body, because that was not an easy thing to do when Moses did it. It was a miracle. By the way, again, people who are, why is the word Palestine used here? Again, Ginsburg wrote this in 1909. It was translated, by the way, by Henrietta Zoll, the founder of Hadassah, and an amazing woman in her own right, spoke a whole bunch of languages and translated this, translated this from German. In 1913, in 1909 and 1930, I mean, at that time, that's what they called the land. The Midrash actually says Eretz Yisrael. It says the land of Israel. But at that time, the land of Israel was called by the Turks and by the British. Later on, it was called Palestine. That's what they referred to it as by the Roman name. It had been referred to by the Roman name for a long time. But it's not an Arab name, by the way. Palestine is a Roman version of what they called the Philistines. They renamed Israel. Palestine is a ultimate, disrespect to the Jewish people. That's why they called it that. So, and again, it was referred to by Jews as Palestine. There was no political connotation to it. It was literally a geographical place name for a long time, for almost 2,000 years. So only later does it become a place where people are called Palestinians. The people weren't called that. The area wasn't called that, other than the fact that, again, that was what the Romans called it, and that's what, it was never a kingdom in its own right after the Jewish destruction by the Romans. It was never its own kingdom again. It was part of the Byzantine Empire, part of the Crusader kingdoms, part of the Arab kingdoms, part of the Turks for a really long time. And then for a very short period of time, about 30 years, it was part of the British Empire. So what happens to Joseph is again, unfortunately, he has to tell his brothers what to do with his body. Here's what else he says.
Joseph also admonished his brothers to walk in the ways of the Lord, so that they might become worthy of his grace and help. Especially he impressed upon his brothers and his sons the virtue of chastity and a steadfast moral life. He told them all that had happened to him, the hatred of his brothers, the persecutions of the wife of Potiphar, the slander, envy, and malice of the Egyptians, to show how that those who fear the Lord are not forsaken by him in darkness or bondage or tribulation or distress. I was sold into slavery, he said, but the Lord delivered me. I was thrown into prison, but his strong hand helped me. I was tortured by hunger, but the Lord himself gave me sustenance. I was alone, and God comforted me. And as for you, if you will walk in the ways of chastity and purity, in patience and humility of heart, the Lord will dwell among you, for he loves a chaste life. And if you, my children, will observe the commandments of the Lord, he will raise you up here in this world and bless you there in the world to come. If men seek to do evil to you, pray for them, and you will be delivered from all evil by the Lord. On account of my forbearing patience, I received the daughter of my master to wife, and her dowry was 100 talents of gold. And God gave me also beauty like the beauty of a flower, more than all the children of Jacob. And he preserved me to my old age in vigor and beauty, for in all things did I resemble Jacob.
Wow, that's quite a quite a final message, if you will, right? Look at my life, right? And if you do the right things, you'll be saved. Again, in this version of the Midrash, Osnat is the daughter of the same Potiphar. It's the same woman. This one definitely doesn't seem to take into consideration some of the other things that we've read about Joseph today in the Midrash and other Midrashim, but it basically says, look at my life, and if you do the right thing, if you lead a moral life, you behave well, especially it seems to be in when it comes to your personal behavior, good things will happen to you. And that seems to be, again, this kind of message for the Jewish people, for his nephews, for the rest of the family. Here's what it says too.
Joseph continued and told them the visions he had had, in which the future of Israel was revealed to him. And then he closed with the words, I know that the Egyptians will oppress you after my death, but God will execute vengeance for your sakes, and he will lead you to the land of promise of your fathers. But you shall surely carry my bones with you from hence, for if my remains are taken to Canaan, the Lord will be with you in the light, and Behar will be with the Egyptians in the darkness. Also take with you the bones of your mother Zilpah, and bury them near the sepulchre of Bilhah and Rachel.
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting, did you think about, what about these other ladies, right? This is, these were their mothers. These were, if they weren't, these are matriarchs, maybe not the same level as Leah and Rachel, but they have to be recognized, and they have to be accorded proper dignity as well. And so, here it says, the bones of your mother Zilpah, and bury them near the sepulchre of Bilhah and Rachel. So the assumption here is that Bilhah was already put in Rachel's tomb, but that Zilpah would also be buried, there too. Think about the fact that, again, these women are not, we don't know what happens to them when they die. We don't know what would have happened to what would have happened to a concubine, if you will. We don't know where they would have been buried with regards to the rest of the family. But Joseph says to bury them, they can't be buried in the cave of Machpelah, but they can be buried in the next best place, which is the tomb of Rachel, which is where the matriarch is, where a matriarch is buried, and now two other matriarchs are buried there too. So it's a nice little midrash about what happens to Bilhah and Zilpah, in case you ever wondered. There's a midrash that they're buried with Rachel.
These words ended, he stretched out his feet and slept his last eternal sleep. And the whole of Israel mourned him, and the whole of Egypt was in great grief, for he had been a compassionate friend to the Egyptians too, and he had done good to them and given them wise counsel and assistance in all their undertakings. Joseph's wish that his bones should rest in the Holy Land was fulfilled when the Israelites went forth from Egypt, and no less a personage than Moses applied himself to its execution. Such was Joseph's reward for the devotion he had displayed in the interment of his father's body, for he had done all things needful himself, leaving naught to others. Therefore, so great a man as Moses busied himself with the realization of Joseph's wish.
So here the Midrash tells us that Joseph himself, well, we know he didn't embalm his father. That was left to the Egyptians to do. But it says that he had taken care of the rest of the burial once they got there. Which meant, like, he literally buried, in those days they didn't bury them in the ground, they put them in the cave. But maybe he carried his dad and laid his dad's body down in the grave, in the cave, and took care of his dad's body. The same way that we take part in doing the actual, some of the burial, right? We take some of the earth and we do that. Because there's this belief in Judaism that if you do this, there will be a time when you will be repaid for that. And Joseph, who better could repay him than Moses himself? But Moses takes care of, it's just the execution. He's not talking about executing. He's talking about the execution of the mitzvah of burial. That Joseph actually was buried by Moses himself. And he wasn't buried by Moses because Moses wasn't able to go into the land of Israel. But Moses took the body out and made sure that it would get done. And Moses does tell the Israelites, make sure you do do what we promised to Joseph. It's one of the last things that Moses says to the Israelites in Deuteronomy, make sure you bury Joseph. So Moses is very concerned with making sure that that is executed, if you will. Now we're going to read about how Moses did do this, because it was not easy to find where Joseph was even buried. Let's read this amazing midrash about where Joseph was buried before he was buried in Israel.
For 3 days and 3 nights preceding the Exodus, Moses hunted up and down through the land of Egypt for Joseph's coffin, because he knew that Israel could not leave Egypt without heeding the oath given to Joseph. But his trouble was in vain. The coffin was nowhere to be found. Sarah, the daughter of Asher, met Moses tired and exhausted, and in answer to her question about the cause of his weariness, he told her of his fruitless search. Sarah took him to the Nile River and told him that the leaden coffin made for Joseph by the Egyptians had been sunk there after having been sealed up on all sides. The Egyptians had done this at the instigation and with the help of the magicians, who, knowing that Israel could not leave the country without the coffin, had used their arts to put it in a place whence it could not be removed.
Wow, that is amazing, because again, the Egyptian magicians, who are very powerful and very skilled, know that the Israelites can't leave without it. So they basically create a situation so it cannot be moved. They weigh it down and they hide it, and they make it impossible, virtually impossible, for the Jews to ever leave, because they can't leave without Joseph. So this is an amazing magical connection to the land through Joseph, and through, again, this responsibility that we have. It's a holy responsibility. You can probably guess what's going to happen now. I will tell you what I love about this midrash is Sarah, this wonderful woman that we learned about before in the midrash, who is super old and super wise, and she's the link between when they got to Egypt and when they leave Egypt. She's the only person left who actually came down to Egypt. Now she's Joseph's granddaughter, which means that she was a niece. She was Jacob's granddaughter, Joseph's niece. She's Asher's daughter, Asher, Joseph's brother's daughter. So she's the niece of Joseph, and she knows where the bodies are buried, as we say. She literally does know where the bodies are buried, and she wants to make sure that she's able to pass that wisdom on now to Moses. So she's the link. Sarah, this amazing woman, is the link and the repository of knowledge during the time the Jews were in Egypt. And no one else would have known if it wasn't for her. So it's a great story. It's a great, it's not a throwaway character. She's like the link. I mean, she's this amazing lady that is able to keep the stories alive. So kind of a worthy of some more midrash. So this wise woman. All right.
Moses now took Joseph's cup, and he cut 4 flat pieces from it, and engraved a lion on one of them, an eagle on the second, a bull on the third, and a human figure on the fourth. He threw the first, with the lion, into the river, saying at the same time, "Joseph, Joseph, the hour for the redemption of Israel has arrived. The Shekinah lingers here only for your sake. The clouds of glory await your coming. If you will show yourself, well and good. If not, then we are clear from our oath." But the coffin did not appear.
Wow. So here's Moses doing a little magic, right? So the Egyptians used magic to hide it, to sink it. Now Moses is doing some magic to get it out. So again, these are mystical symbols. These are the symbols of the angelic beings that have different faces on them. He's using them as tools, talismans, amulets to get the coffin. Okay, that's the first.
Then Moses threw the second plate into the water, that with the figure of the eagle, repeating the same words. But again the coffin did not rise from the bed of the Nile, and there it remained too when he threw in the third plate, bearing the figure of the bull, and called upon Joseph a third time to come forth. But the fourth plate, with the human figure and the fourth invocation to Joseph, brought the coffin to the surface of the water. Moses seized it, and in joy he bore it off. While Israel had been busy gathering gold and silver from the Egyptians, Moses had been thinking of nothing but Joseph's coffin, and his happiness was great that he had been permitted to fulfill the wish of Joseph.
Yep. And so again, they're showing Moses different from everybody else that was in Egypt at the time. All the other Jews were thinking about, how do I get my back pay, right? How do I get my money to get out of here? Not Moses. All Moses wanted to do was get Joseph's body. That's all he wanted, was to fulfill that promise, that ancient promise to get him out. Very, very powerful. And again, it shows you why Moses is so special, why he's so unique. But he's able to work the magic and to get the coffin. Now here's what happens in the wilderness.
During the 40 years of wandering through the desert, the coffin was in the midst of Israel as a reward for Joseph's promise to his brethren, I will nourish you and take care of you. God had said, as you live for 40 years, they will take care of your bones.
Wow. So the Midrash is saying that as long as they had that coffin, that's what protected them. I mean, the Torah says God was with them, but the Midrash basically says it's because they took care of Joseph's bones, that because they honored Joseph's bones, they get this. Now they recognize, the rabbis recognize, wow, as they were marching through the wilderness for 40 years, and this is what we're going to finish with, for 40 years, the Israelites have two shrines. They have two things that they carry on a bier. They have two things that they're carrying through the wilderness: the ark and the body of Joseph. And here's what it says.
All this time in the desert, Israel carried two shrines with them. The one, the coffin containing the bones of the dead man Joseph. The other, the ark containing the covenant of the living God. The wayfarers who saw the two receptacles wondered, and they would ask, how does the ark of the dead come next to the ark of the ever-living? The answer was, the dead man enshrined in the one fulfilled the commandments enshrined in the other. In the latter it is written, I am the Lord your God, and he said, am I in the place of God? Here it is written, you shall have no other gods before my face. And he said, I fear God. Here it is written, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And therefore he did not swear by God, but said, by the life of Pharaoh. Here it is written, remember the Sabbath day. And he said to the overseer of his palace on Friday, slay and make ready, meaning for the Sabbath. Here it is written, honor your father and your mother. And he said, when his father desired to send him to his brothers, here am I, though he knew it was dangerous for him to go. Here it is written, you shall not kill. And he refrained from murdering Potiphar when Potiphar's wife urged him to do it. Here it is written, you shall not commit adultery. And he scorned the adulterous proposals of Potiphar's wife. Here it is written, you shall not steal. And he stole nothing from Pharaoh, but gathered up all the money and brought it to Pharaoh's house. Here it is written, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And he told his father nothing of what his brothers had done to him, though what he might have told was the truth. Here it is written, you shall not covet. And he did not covet Potiphar's wife.
So, of course, what's the lesson here is that Joseph lived the 10 Commandments. Why did they carry the 10 Commandments and carry Joseph's body next to it? Because this guy lived the 10 Commandments. He literally lived the Torah. And so what it teaches us that, again, you know, on one hand, one could see it's kind of like sacrilegious to have a dead body by the ark. They said no. On the contrary, this is a person who lived it, and this is what and this is what we're going to live by. And he represents that. So again, it's an interesting, some of the Midrash, we don't know that Joseph kept Shabbat. So they basically said that he did when he was in the palace, he kept Shabbat. We don't know that, but they like that idea that he did it. And there's Midrash that he did keep Shabbat while he was there. But we definitely know he honored his parents, right? He says when his father calls him, right? He says, "Hineni, here I am," even though he knew it was dangerous. So again, it's a beautiful Midrash on Joseph, and that, as Judith pointed out, Joseph doesn't always seem so good. He doesn't always seem like the best example, but there are things in his life that when we look at it, we go, you know what? He did live a righteous life, and that he was somebody who we can respect. And again, it's one of the reasons why we still have a lot of Josephs rolling around out there, Jewish Joes, because he was a hero, and his life wasn't easy, but he didn't give up. He didn't give up, and he didn't give up on the Torah. He didn't give up on according to tradition, on his faith. So it's kind of a beautiful midrash on why they carried his body, or what it meant by carrying his body. So we'll finish with this last piece right here. Again, the two shrines, the two coffins, two arks, if you will. And we call them an aron. The same word we use for the aron for the coffin, we also use for the ark, the aron. So we have the aron Kodesh, which we call our ark, where we keep the Torah, but it was originally the aron, the ark for the Ten Commandments. The aron is also what we call a coffin. And so the rabbis point out that there's a similarity in those words between a coffin and between the ark. Interesting, right? And again, when somebody who's righteous lives by the words of Torah, their ark, their coffin is like the ark of Torah. Not just Joseph, but other people too. All right, here we go.
On their arrival in the Holy Land, the Israelites buried the bones of Joseph in Shechem, for God spoke to the tribes, saying, "From Shechem did you steal him, and unto Shechem shall you return him." God, who is so solicitous about the dead bodies of the pious, is even more solicitous about their souls, which stand before him like angels and do their service, ministering unto him.
Yep, and that's a perfect way to end, because again, at this time of year, when we this weekend coming up, Sunday, and of course on Monday when we offer our Yizkor prayers, it's a tradition of lighting a candle for our loved ones and to remember them at Yom Kippur, and then on Yom Kippur to offer the Yizkor prayers in honor of our parents, our loved ones, not just our parents, but those who've passed that are important to us. As I mentioned, we sent out the email yesterday, please send me photos. The email has my email address in it, because we have a very special Yizkor song that was just written last week by Gabriel Mann. And our goal, and we have many photos already, but please send them to me. If you have photos, and you need to get them to me today, because we need to edit it into this montage. We're going to have a montage of our loved ones playing, showing during the Yizkor melody that Gabe wrote. We're also going to have the traditional Kaddish and the traditional prayers, but we also are adding this new tradition of and I don't know that it'll be a tradition, but we're adding a new ritual of having this song and being, because we're on video this year, or on whatever. We have this, let's use it effectively, and let's have some, not just names in a book, but let's also maybe add some photos. So we're going to try it. Who knows? Maybe it'll become a thing. Maybe it'll become a tradition. I don't know. But please send me those photos ASAP, so that I can include them in our montage tribute. And also on Sunday morning, there's a Kever Avot service that I produced with Eden, and it's going to be up at 8 o'clock on JLTV, but we'll also have it on our website, on our Facebook page, and on our it's not, I'm not in it that much. I do a couple things like I normally do at Kever Avot at Eden, but I include it, and the rabbis who are part of it were people that Eden wanted. And there's also some beautiful melodies and some pieces that the Jewish Symphony did for a beautiful choral version of as we remember. And so it'll be up on Sunday morning, and you can watch it. Again, you don't have to have JLTV to watch it. You can watch it on our Facebook page. And it's about an hour long, just under an hour long, but it gives you kind of what the Kever Avot experience is, which is usually they have a tent and they have same kind of thing, 4 or 5 rabbis and cantors doing pieces for the holiday. I think this came out, I think it came out pretty nice. And there is this tradition of visiting the cemetery. You can go to the cemetery. There's no reason not to go. You're allowed to go in there, but they didn't want to have they couldn't have a communal service, which is why we did it on video. But you can go to the cemetery anytime during this time. It's considered an auspicious time to visit our loved ones and to offer up prayers on their behalf. And quite frankly, the tradition is to ask them to advocate on our behalf. The idea is they're that much closer to God. As we just read, they are standing before him like angels, not necessarily angels, but like angels. They're with God now, and they're helping God. And so being that close to God, they're able to help us in getting forgiveness and advocating on our behalf, letting God know that we are really trying our best. So next week we'll read a little bit about the other sons and how they say goodbye. The other sons, assumedly, Joseph dies first, and then the other patriarchs, or again, heads of tribes, also will go, and that's what we'll be reading next week. So again, we wish everyone a good seal in the book of life, as we say now, a Gemar Tov, that you're sealed for a life and for a peace, and for good health. Everybody should have good health. So thank you, everybody, for being here for the first class of the new year. And again, Shema Tova, everybody.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Why don't you plug Jonah?
Oh yeah, thank you, Judith. So yeah, in addition to our video things, we are going to have a Torah study on Yom Kippur. Right on Monday, our tradition is to study Jonah, and so we're going to have Jonah opened up to everybody at a Zoom call. That's going to be at 5 o'clock. So yeah, you people who are here with us, you are the people who really need to be there. A lot of you have been there in the past for Jonah, but we hope that our Tuesday and Wednesday people and everybody will be there for that. We did a Torah study Sunday for the Akedah, for the binding of Isaac, which was wonderful, and really, really great time reading the Torah. Judith read the Torah portion for us for Rosh Hashanah. And the tradition is to read Jonah on Yom Kippur and to delve into that story, which every year says something new to us, I guarantee you. And this year, there are going to be some things that we see that sound really, really hyper relevant to a year of quarantine and restriction, and sometimes wanting to go down, lay down, and not wake up. I'll leave it at that. You got to come on at 5 o'clock on Monday to finish off Yom Kippur with that. So I'm going to get back to getting that service ready for everybody. I am still in need of pictures, to answer Judith's question. Please send pictures. And again, if you don't, we'll still have it, but I'd love for your family members to be part of it. So again, send them my way to rabbi@temple.me. Again, everybody, stay good, stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of days.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Tomorrow night.
What?
See you tomorrow night.
Okay. Yes, tomorrow night is Torah study. Thank you. Ha'azinu, one of the last portions in Deuteronomy. Thank you, Mom. All right, everybody. Stay good. Bye-bye.